my friends are synths.
Dreadbox are one of my favourite synth companies. They hold a special place in my heart, not just because they are based in Athens, which is one of my all-time favourite cities, but also because they are partly to blame, or credit I guess, for dragging me into the world of analogue synthesizers in the first place. Back in 2015 or thereabouts, I was in this shop called Rubadub here in Glasgow, buying some cheapy studio monitors, when I spotted the original Dreadbox Erebus. Up until that point, I had always kind of associated synthesizers with bulky keyboards, and so this tiny black and green box with its strange letters and loads of holes everywhere kind of blew my mind at the time. I'd never really seen anything quite like that before. I was of course already making music by that point with Strange Devices and Game Boys, and I vaguely knew about the existence of Eurorack, but this was something else entirely. The compact standalone nature of it really kind of captured my imagination, and I ended up buying one just a few months later. Since then, my collection of Dreadbox synths has expanded, and at some point I foolishly sold the Erebus when I was short on cash, an action which I came to regret later on. There was just something special about that particular synth, even if it had overlap with others that I owned. It had this warm oscillator sound and a gritty delay, and I've always wanted to pick another one up. The original Erebus was one of Dreadbox's earlier synthesizers and is now known affectionately as version 1. There have been various different iterations since then, including a version 2 and also a version 3, which I think was larger, a bit cleaner sounding, and also had some additional features. None of these are available anymore, which is a wee bit of a shame, as the Dreadbox has become something of a modern classic, if you will. It's a bit of a strange term to use, but it's definitely kind of iconic in its own right. However, Dreadbox have listened to the people and come up with a reissue based on the original V1. Whilst the reissue is largely faithful to the original Erebus, there are a few functional differences. There's the obvious fact that the reissue is a bit smaller and lacks the wooden end cheeks of the V1. Instead, it's now got its own self-contained metal housing. Interestingly, basically all of the connections that were on the sides of the original are now also gone, so the DC connection has been swapped for USB power, the full-sized MIDI DIN jacks have also gone and have been replaced by mini jack MIDI connections at the bottom, and finally the audio output is also now on monophonic TRS mini jack rather than a 1/4 inch, meaning that it doubles up neatly as a headphone output as well. I've got mixed feelings about all of this, to be honest. Whilst I'm fairly pleased to see USB power on there, as it helps standardise things a bit in my cluttered studio, I do think the placement of the port on the left-hand side of the device is a bit of a strange choice. Similarly, as much as I've come to accept the proliferation of mini jack MIDI now, particularly on smaller synthesizers like this, I also think that having those connections at the bottom right is kind of counterintuitive. It doesn't seem like the natural placement for them. It's worth noting that MIDI is only over mini jack. In other words, there isn't MIDI over USB as well. One change that I do really appreciate is that switching MIDI channel is much simpler on the reissue than it was on the original. Instead of having to faff about with dip switches and try and, to remember the correct combination to get channel 7 or 8 or whatever, you simply switch the Erebus to Omni mode, and then whatever channel was last used with the synth in Omni mode will be the channel that is set going forward for Chan mode. So you can set it to channel 2, play a note, flip it back, and you're all ready to go. Overall, whilst I am always going to have nostalgia for my long-lost V1, the design of this reissue feels much simpler and really leans into the whole idea of the Erebus as a semi-modular instrument. In fact, to that end, you can also remove it from its chassis entirely, mount it in a Eurorack case, and power it from your modular PSU. That isn't something that I think I would ever do, but it is cool to have that option, and I know that a lot of people are interested in that. Included in the box is the Erebus itself, a MIDI DIN to mini jack converter, and a ribbon cable should you wish to plug it into your modular. There isn't a USB cable or any patch cables included, so if you're buying this as your first synthesizer, then that is something that you should consider. For those of you who are coming to the Erebus for the first time, it is a duophonic analog synthesizer. There are two oscillators which each have two different waveforms to choose from. You can choose to mix these together as well and also hard sync them. They've got independent glide controls for each oscillator, but they do share both the same 2-pole 12 dB filter, which has got an ADSR envelope, as well as the VCA, which has got an AR envelope. One of the defining features of the original Erebus was its gritty lo-fi analog echo, which is also included in the reissue. And finally, there is of course the patch bay on the right hand side, which gives you greater control over the individual elements, or lets you interface the synth with other modular equipment using control voltage. I've got to admit that I've always been a wee bit sceptical of the idea that oscillators sound markedly different from one another, since ultimately they're just meant to be producing specific waveforms, right? However, in practice, I do hear a difference with certain synthesizers, and whatever the reason for that might be, the combination of the oscillators in the Erebus, along with the filter, and that grungy echo is just beautiful. I really love it. For a synth that has only got two oscillators and a fairly limited selection of waveforms, it sounds far better than it should be, to be honest, and I've discovered some really sweet spots whilst playing with it. In actual fact, certain patches instantly recalled a distinct character that I feel defined some of my earlier music that I'd made, and I'm glad to have that back. I've been really pleased to see that Dreadbox have reissued some of their earlier synthesizers in this way, because they do still have a lot to offer. The original Erebus helped me understand signal flow and how to use control voltage thanks to its design, but also because it looked and sounded so good that I was excited to play with it and use it, which is obviously important. You know, pleasure of ownership is an essential factor, or at least a contributory factor to the enjoyment and use that you get out of a device. The reissue faithfully replicates what made the original great in the first place, and does so in a slightly more compact, portable package. Yeah, it might not have all of the bells and whistles and the added features that you get on the V3, and you do have to get used to the mini jack connections for MIDI and also, the audio output, but they are priced competitively and would be a great option for anybody interested in making electronic music, especially if you're looking to dip your toe in the water of modularity or, understanding control voltage, but you're not quite ready or prepared to take the hit of a full-blown Eurorack system. For my part, I am glad that Erebus has made its way into my studio again, and I definitely won't be parting with this one. I also have got the Hades to take a look at, and I'll be doing that in another separate video. If you've got any questions about the Erebus, you can drop them below and I will do my best to answer, or somebody else can give you an answer. And for now, I'm going to leave you with some musical creation.